I want to talk about an important topic in economics known as elasticity. Now, elasticity is a general concept used to quantify the response in one variable when another variable changes. So if we're interested in how A responds to a change in B, we can look at the elasticity. And the elasticity of A with respect to B is defined as the percentage change in A divided by the percentage change in B. Now, there are a lot of different elasticities we can look at, but let's look at the most basic one, or the most common one in economics, and that's the price elasticity of demand. Here we're interested in how quantity demanded changes when price changes. And so in this case, quantity demanded is A, and the change in price is B. So we define that to be the percentage change in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in price. This is an important concept for businesses because, generally speaking, when we raise price, people will demand less of our good, but how much less? If they won't demand too much less, it may benefit us to raise price because that will increase the revenue we take in. If we increase price a lot and we only sell a little bit less, then we're going to make more money. On the other hand, if quantity responds a lot to a change in price, that is, a small change in price causes quantity demanded to go down by a lot, then raising price is going to be bad. It's going to reduce our revenue. It may be the case that we'd like to cut price because a small cut in price might increase the amount demanded by quite a bit. So, what does elasticity look like for different types of goods? Let's take a look at four hypothetical elasticities for four different products. Let's take the case of insulin. If price went up by 10%, we might expect there to be no change in the quantity demanded. Why? Because if you're a diabetic, you need insulin to live. And if you're not a diabetic, you don't really care what the price of it is. You're not going to buy it anyhow. We refer to this as perfectly inelastic, or an elasticity of 0, right? Percentage change in Q is 0 divided by 10 gives us something that's perfectly inelastic. Okay? The second type example here is basic telephone service. The change in price is 10%. Price goes up by 10%, for example. And in this case, the quantity demanded goes down by 1%. So we get an elasticity of -1. Okay? Or actually minus 0.1. Makes it inelastic. And by basic telephone service, the definition's probably changed. If you go back 30 or 40 years ago, you were talking about a landline phone. Now you're talking about cell phones. And even if price goes up, most of us don't have any other alternative for communicating with people. We do need a phone, so we're not going to cut back the quantity we demand by very much. How about beef? If beef goes up by 10%, we might expect the quantity demanded to go down by 10%. That's going to give us an elasticity of -1. We call that unitarily elastic. Why is that? Well, if price of beef goes up, there are some substitutes. There's chicken, there's pork, there's fish, okay, some other kinds of seafood. So if you want to eat meat, there are some substitutes, okay? A fairly limited number. I mean, you can eat kangaroo and alligator, but those are probably a little more difficult to get a hold of. But, you know, beef and chicken and pork tend to be pretty good substitutes for most people. On the other hand, bananas, if the price went up by 10%, perhaps the quantity demanded would go down by 30%. Okay, this is a case where the elasticity is -3, and we call this elastic. It's very responsive to a change in price. Well, why? There are a lot of substitutes for bananas. Okay, while there's a fairly limited number of types of meat, there's really a lot of different kinds of fruits. You can substitute apples for bananas, or oranges, kiwi fruit, watermelon, cantaloupe. I mean, there's strawberries, blueberries. There's really a lot of substitutes there. Okay. Let's take a look at what causes demand elasticity. Well, the real big one is the availability of substitutes. Okay, when there are no substitutes, you're going to have inelastic demand, as is the case in insulin. But when you have a lot of substitutes, like the case of bananas, tends to be very elastic, okay, very responsive to a change in price. Okay, how important is the item in the budget? If it's a really small portion of the budget, people may just sort of ignore it. All right, if the price of bananas goes up, okay, from 30 cents a pound to 60 cents a pound, okay, people don't buy hundreds of pounds of bananas every week. They buy maybe a pound or two of bananas. You may not even notice. Okay, so in fact, it might have actually a lower elasticity than the example we gave. Okay, things that are a big part of your budget, you may think about a lot more carefully, and you may cut back should the price go up. Okay, and we can also argue that there's a time dimension to elasticity, that in the short run, well, things tend to be more inelastic, but over the long run, they tend to become more elastic, okay, or more responsive to a change in price. Why? Because as a household, you'll shift away. Okay, you might keep buying bananas for a while, but you realize that, you know what, apples are a pretty good substitute, and you may shift away to apples or oranges. Producers may develop good substitute goods. Okay, if you go back 30, 40, 50 years ago, a landline telephone was a necessity. Okay, it was very inelastic in terms of its sensitivity to a change in price. Okay, price went up by the phone company. You probably didn't get rid of your phone. Today, with the substitute of having cell phones, a lot of people are happy to keep a landline phone if it's cheap enough. But if the price goes up enough, people will shift away and just get rid of their landline phone and use their cell phone. Okay, here are a couple of pictures. And on the left, we have the quantity of insulin demanded. And you can see we have a vertical line, vertical demand curve. That is, price doesn't change at all. I'm sorry, when price changes, quantity doesn't change at all. We call this perfectly inelastic. And as we said before, look, if you need insulin to live, you're not going to cut back if the price goes up. If you're not a diabetic, there's no reason to buy insulin, so even if the price is very inexpensive, you're not going to buy it. Over here, we have what we call perfectly elastic demand. This is the case where you can sell as much as you want at the prevailing price. If the price, there's no reason for you to lower your price because you can already sell as much as you want at the prevailing price. And if you were to raise price even a little bit, you wouldn't be able to sell anything. Why? Because there are perfectly good substitutes. Other people are producing essentially the same product. Okay? Quantity of wheat demanded. If you happen to be a farmer, your wheat is the same as the farmer across the street. So there's no reason, you can't raise price. Okay? That's perfectly elastic demand. Okay? We can, I'll just substitute. If I work for Wonder Bread, I'll substitute buying your wheat and I'll buy someone else's wheat. Okay, how do we define these things? Okay, inelastic demand, as we've sort of mentioned already, is demand that responds somewhat but not a great deal to changes in price. Okay, inelastic demand always has a numerical value between 0 and -1. That is, when price rises, people buy less, but not as much as the percentage increase in price. If price falls, people buy more, but not as much as the percentage decrease in price. So, as I said, phone service, okay, or cell phone service these days is probably fairly inelastic. Okay, if the price rises by 10%, people may cut back on their cell phones, but probably not by as much as 10%. If the price falls by 10%, people may increase their usage, but not by as much as 10%. For example, in a house where you have children, if the price is cheap enough, you may get your small child a cell phone. But if the price goes up, you may opt not to get them a cell phone. But you're not going to reduce your cell phone usage. You still need one, to call work, to contact the outside world. So your consumption's not going to increase or decrease as much as the percentage change in price. Okay. Other types of elasticity, unitary elasticity. This is the case in which the percentage change in quantity of product demanded is the same as the percentage change in price in absolute value terms. Remember that we expect this sign to be -1. So if the price goes up by 10%, you reduce your consumption 10%. If the price goes down by 10%, you buy 10% more. Elastic demand is the case in which the percentage change in quantity demanded is larger than the percentage change in price in absolute value terms. So this is the case where if price goes down by 10%, you might buy 12 or 13 or 15% more. And in the case of perfectly elastic demand, this is the case where demand in which quantity drops to 0 at the slightest price increase. Okay, so you're very sensitive to a change in price because there are other substitutes, like the example of wheat that we looked at a minute ago. A couple other elasticities. We've been looking at percentage change in quantity demanded divided by percentage change in price of that good, but you can also look at the percentage change in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in income. So this measures how responsive demand is to a change in income. Okay? If the sign is negative, we call this an inferior good. That is, if you're getting richer, if this number here is getting bigger, but you're demanding less of it, we call that an inferior good. And that's the case where you may shift away from some inexpensive, cheap product to a better product, okay? A more luxurious product. Perhaps a lot of people will eat rice and beans when they're poor because it's fairly inexpensive, but as their income goes up, they buy less of that stuff because they can find better sources of protein and better sources of food to eat. If it's positive but less than 1, so if your income goes up by 10% and the quantity demand goes up by 6%, that's a necessity. Okay, you're buying a little bit more of it, but not necessarily a lot more of it. And in the case where we have a positive and greater than 1 elasticity, that is, your income goes up 10%, but you buy 20% more of this, this is what we call luxury good. So there are items where once you sort of cross that threshold and you have enough money, you buy a lot more of that. Perhaps you eat out more in nice restaurants. Perhaps as your income goes up, you buy more expensive flat panel TVs. Okay, shift away from the inexpensive ones. Certain goods are sensitive to a change in income. Okay. And the other type of elasticity that's sort of interesting is instead of looking at the percentage change in the quantity of Y demanded divided by the percentage change in the price of Y, we look at the percentage change in the price of X, okay, a different good. And what we find is that if it's positive, we call these things substitutes. So if the price of chicken goes up, we would expect the percentage change in the quantity of pork demanded to go up because you'll substitute buying chicken with pork. Okay? Or if the price of beef goes up, you'll buy more chicken. If they have a negative sign, they're complements. So if the price of, for example, peanut butter goes up, the quantity demanded of jelly goes down because a lot of people use those two products together, peanut butter and jelly in a sandwich. So if peanut butter is more expensive, and so I'm not buying as much of that, I don't need as much jelly in order to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich because I'm not going to make as many of those. So that's the basic intuition behind elasticity. It measures responsiveness of one good to another. And in a separate tutorial, I'll show you how to do these calculations.